I've taken the title of today's talk from a small synopsis from Julian of Norwich, and I am still obsessed, as it were, with Julian of Norwich since I went to see her place some weeks ago. Even before that, I had read Women Saints of East and West and found her biography. Women Saints of East and West was a publication from our center in London and was published some time ago, probably the 1970s and odd. And the importance of that book is that it acknowledges that there are women saints in every single traditional religion, from Judaism to Islam, Sufism to Christianity to Buddhism, every single kind of flavor, if you will, of religion and religious practice brings about people of the highest level of purity, what we call saintliness. But on a reflection, synopsis of her book, that is, her book will be published as Revelations of Divine Love. There is one small reflection called The Strength of Humility. I thought that was a very good title. So what do we mean by humility? It is better to have humility than be humiliated. And there's a very good lesson from a few stories. So firstly, you may have heard of Bharata. Bharata is the land of Bharata. Bharata is what people call India today. But it's centered around a king. And I won't go into his entire life, but suffice to say that he retired. He was an unusual king. He kind of operated his kingdom on the basis of democracy. And there came a stage in his life when he thought, okay, now I can leave. I can go into the forest as usual and spend my days in meditation so that I can live the life of Vanaprastha, forest dweller, and ultimately a sannyasa, and get my freedom. Now, that's kind of a simple way of saying we're all kind of destined, as it were, for freedom. It doesn't look like that. And the search for freedom is not so much a search in our Vedanta as a statement, we already have it. We already have it, and therefore we have an urge to connect with that and experience it, because if we are free and already free, how is it that we don't feel it? And the reason is because this knowledge of our free area, so to speak, our spirit area, so to speak, is obscured by something else. And lack of knowledge, lack of understanding of it, a reading of existence as not being this, is what we call ignorance. So ignorance constitutionally is this lack of understanding that a portion of myself, says Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, is here as a living cell. And so we are eternal, we are free, and yet we feel completely bound. And not only are we bound, but we are bound in very specific ways. These specific ways are what we call aham, I, egoism. So we deal with this in depth when we give personality workshops, development workshops, because the constituent parts that make up this identification with a body and a mind and a particular history is from two factors. One is what we call inheritance. Now we can argue whether it is inheritance from a previous life, previous experience, or whether it is inheritance genetically and so on and so forth, that we'll all leave out. Suffice to say, we come with a preordained understanding of things or a preordained reaction. How do we know this? Well, because various studies of mothers in the same pregnant state with the same duration of pregnancy are seated and music is played or some sounds are played, and then we can monitor the reaction of the fetus in the womb, and we'll find they're all different. That means that during the 9 months pregnancy, at least, a different kind of personality emerges, regardless of the cause. Don't worry about the cause. And the cause may also be quite complex. Don't forget, during 9 months, the baby's or the fetus's diet, the nourishment, is the same as the mother's. And we would also think that the mother's thoughts are also the baby's thoughts. Even though thoughts are not formulated, the mother's feelings are transferred. All this goings on in the mental framework is all transferred to every single cell of the body, organic cell of the body. It's absorbed. And you may say that maybe that's a factor, and I'm pretty sure you'd be correct. But in addition to that, what makes that particular circumstance that we can deal with under the subject of transmigration, suffice to say that it is there. And then, having been born, another factor comes in. Because when the baby comes out into the light and the noise, unfamiliar territory, it's not that happy. Fortunately, it cries and clarifies its lungs. So cleans its lungs out and so on. And you'd think that if the baby was happy to be in the world, the baby wouldn't cry. Anyway, nature arranged it very differently. The baby was very nice and content in a kind of distant sound with the mother's heartbeat there, in a kind of fluid and so on and so forth, was used to that. And all the hands and the legs and the heart and all the cells in the head and the skull, all of that was developing from a single zygote cell, which in effect is a kind of miracle, still not fully understood. How can it happen? From a single cell, you get many, many different cells with different functions. We leave that biology aside and come now to a child being born into the world and feeling that it has to fight against unfair odds. And so as it develops, it learns to create a strategic self-defense system whereby it assumes certain personality traits which are good for its survival. And so different kinds of egos emerge. But we know that we have to cultivate some kinds of values and virtues in order to get out of what is a trap, because what we consider to be an extremely important thing and a vital formula for surviving and thriving even turns out to be a big trap. We can label it under egoism. So when we talk about humility, what are we really talking about? We're talking about a wrong understanding of who we are and an association not just with the body and the mind, but with the whole history and environment that goes with it. And not only that, but we are convinced our strategy is correct and we can't get over it. And the strategy is a kind of swing between a desire and a fear. And the desire is obviously for something that is good, that is pleasant. And the fear is something which is obviously painful, not understanding that both of these strategies will bring us an element of pain. So we have to deal with things in a different way and may form a different strategy. Otherwise, things will be painful from a psychological, emotional point of view. And pills, diets, etc. will not assist in this. It is only a change in the thought pattern. a change in the grooves of the brain, as it were, Swami Vivekananda puts it, a change in our habit. And that requires a determination to do it. So you see, the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is a chapter that starts on a course of Jnana Yoga. That is, we leave behind bhakti and all of that, and we start finding out what is the field that we're operating in and what is the knower of this field. Bhagavad Gita starts us off. In fact, it's entitled, it is the chapter on Kshetra, Kshetrajna, the knower of the field and the knower of the field. But with this remarkable upfront statement, know me, says the divine, to be the knower in all the fields. Not just the one field, but all the fields. Then hear briefly from me what the field is, says Krishna, what its properties are, what its modifications are, whence it arises, who its knower is, and what are his powers. And not only that, but those who have that knowledge have actually sung about it in many different ways, in various chants, trying to convey this truth in an artistic, creative way, and in various scriptural passages indicative of the one reality that remains constant, namely Brahman. They've put it in philosophical terms, which is not only empirically true, but put it in recent stanzas, convincing, like a lawyer standing up saying, making a case for it, using complete logic. So what is our world? Our world, according to this passage, is consisting of only five things, five great elements. Is also egoism, intellect, as also the unmanifest, the 10 sense organs, and the one mind, the five objects of the senses. This is how that's analyzed. We see it as a kind of variation that is presented by the Sankhya geography of existence, as it were. Now, how do we deal with this? So, Icha, Dvesha, Sukham, Dukham, Samgatas Chetana Dritahi, Edat Kshetram Samasena, Savikaram Dhartam, desire. This is one of the cause of our being trapped. Because a desire is a frustrating thing, because it is a desire that is never fully fulfilled. And if it gets fulfilled, then we want another thing. The desire is followed by and filled in by another desire. An assumption that there's a hollow in me and it can be filled, and where is it filled from? Must be from the outside, either the relationship with the outside or a thing from the outside. So desire is on the one side, but aversion is on the other. This is called Sukham Dukham. And pleasure and pain, Sukham Dukham, is there. The body, intelligence, fortitude. This, briefly stated, is the field together with all its modifications. Now, part of that is to understand what is this internal instrument. So we start off with the senses. These are not the outside senses. Everything on the skin is just an interface. An interface with what? When you close your eyes, the senses come out in terms of imagination, dream, etc. The senses, the real senses, are internal and part of this overall internal instrument. And then what else is there? Well, there is some kind of receptive faculty which is there. The vast majority, we can call it manasa. Loosely we can call it mind. And then there is the intellect, which is a governing body, a kind of executive faculty that makes decisions and should be in control. And it has no intelligence of its own, although it seems to have, because behind that will stand the blissful state of this observer, this witness, the source of everything, which is there, a final datum, that when you analyze it and go back and go back and go back, is observed in all the fields. That is why Krishna says, I am the knower in all the fields, taking the place of this internal Atman. Now, how can we cultivate sufficient flowers, if you will, sufficient bouquets of flowers in this mental field, so that purifies the mind, and so we can easily stand where this observer stands, and a way which is non-confrontational, a way which is easy and natural. We have to cultivate some things. Amanitvam, adambitvam, ahimsa, kshantir, arjava, acharya, pasanam, socham, shocham, staryam, atma, vinigraha. Humility is the first thing mentioned. The second is very close to it, modesty. And then, of course, non-injury and so on and so forth. So what is this humility? What is this modesty? We have to honestly assess our good points and our bad points, our virtues and our vices. We have to take stock of what our personality is in totality. We have to acknowledge our flaws. I often say, I have flaws, but I have ceilings too. So we have to acknowledge not only our strengths, but also our vulnerabilities. And our vulnerabilities are always, without exception, to do with this assumption, I am so-and-so, this is my history, this is my ancestry, this is my status. And that really, summarily, is called egotism. Now we have a great example of how to exercise and cultivate humility in the life of the 19th century mystic, Ramakrishna Paramahansa. He had a devotee, Rasak, who was of the very lowest caste, and he knew that this man loved him a lot, but he knew that he could not go to his dwelling house and do some service there. So at the dead of night, he used to go there, and he used to clean this man's latrine and dry it with his own long hair. This was Ramakrishna. Imagine this humility of it. At one point, Ramakrishna was praised. Oh, you are this, you are that, you are great, and so on and so forth. Ramakrishna says, no, I am lower than the lowest worm. Now, you may say that this is self-denigration, but that's not the meaning of it. The meaning of it is to put things in perspective from the point of view of the body and mind, this whole complex, which acts as an actor and a profiteer. And so what is renunciation? Renunciation is necessary. We have to renounce completely what? The profit-actor complex. On which basis? On the basis that I may think I'm grand. I may be proud of my success. I may pat myself on the back because of my skills and achievements. I may think that I'm a good person, and I may also conduct my life in such a way that I contrast others in relation to myself, who I assume to be superior. This, of course, is not humility. I've heard it said, I am humble and proud of it. You see the paradox there. And many people, although it's a kind of joke, but many people will feel this way. I do this, I do that. See how many I's are there. And it is the I that is the product of this ignorance and acts as our obstacle. Now, there is a utility also in ego. So the difficulty is not ego, the difficulty is egoism. And that is why Ramakrishna, in a conversation, talks about this. He says, He says, once I talked to Keshav Sen about the knowledge of Brahman. As we know, Keshav Chandra Sen was a founder of the Brahma Samaj and was a very developed, spiritually developed person, and became acquainted with Ramakrishna, and Ramakrishna became acquainted with him, and they became thick friends, and it's fair to say Keshav became a devotee of Ramakrishna. So he asked me to explain it further, says Ramakrishna, and I said, if I proceed further, then you won't be able to preserve your organization and following. Why? Because the organization and following is seen to belong to somebody, your organization. Let's put it in our own context. My job, my occupation, my family, my pets, my house, my this, my that, my breath, my body, my mind. All of this is a misreading of the truth. It does not belong to you. We have to learn to re-register it to the true owner, and that is the Lord of the universe. And even as a materialist, you can say, I don't have any energy of my own, because we're all running on bottled sunshine, running around on canned solar energy. That's all. And not a single breath belongs to us. We didn't import the breath. We didn't get it from Amazon or somewhere else. And we didn't digest our own food. It is all done for us. And pocket money given for useless thinking, all of that is given to us freely. And every breath is given to us freely. And the air around us is given us freely. And the planet Earth is given to us freely. And its rotation and the pattern of that gives us seasons is given to us freely. All of this is given to us freely. The entire solar system is there at our disposal. We have the freedom to look into the night sky and admire its beauty free of charge. Nobody's giving us a toll. Nobody's saying, please purchase a ticket. When you count up all these blessings that you have, you will soon realize that nothing of this is due to my effort. None of it is due to my input. It is all, I'm just the recipient. Bulk, experience, recipient. Contributor, very little. So he says, of course he's half joking, you won't be able to your organization following. Then please stop here, replies Keshav, and there's a little humorous banter between them. But still, I said to Keshav, I and mine indicate ignorance. So now we have a definition for ignorance. I and mine is ignorance. How to remove it? Well, doing away with the body won't do it. Doing away with the mind won't do it. Re-registering them as instruments by which we can access our freedom will do it. And when we no longer own anything, won't we be humble? And how can we cultivate this sense of humility? Be honest enough to understand, no, I'm not perfect. I am polishing my vessel like a brass vessel. It has to be polished every day. The mind has to be polished every day on a daily basis. And what I say to people is, in the evening, you have a chance to sit down and register all the things that you did in the day and take stock honestly, and then see what needs to be improved tomorrow, and then you can easily find it. And more than that, take all those activities and give them as offerings, the effects, the results, the fruits, to the owner, the divine, and make sure these fruits are worthy of offering. And if they're not, it's okay. We learn to do something more tomorrow, or better tomorrow. So without ignorance, one cannot have such a feeling as I am the doer. These are, and he says, wife, children, and possessions. Thereupon Keshav said, Sir, if one gave up the I, nothing whatsoever would remain. That's our difficulty. We have so identified with this I and mine that we think if we give them up, nothing will remain. And then I reassured him, says Ramakrishna, and said, I'm not asking you to give up all of the I. You should give up only the unripe I. The unripe I is the sticking point, because the unripe I you cannot eat. It's not really a fruit. It is just in an in development phase. And if it remains unripe, then it has no utility. So the unripe I makes one feel, I am the person who's doing, I'm the one who's doing, I'm the doer. Not this is the energy passing through me, moving the hands and arms and legs and so on, the position of jnani. Some energy going through, and even the faculty of decision making. I'll move the arm to the left, I'll move it to the right. I'll move the head this way, I'll move it that way. Even that capacity is supplied to me. I recently read that the humble fruit fly, which is a remarkable study for biologists, we can now model its incredible brain through AI technology and see it in 3 dimensions and map out exactly all the neurological things that are necessary, and they're highly complex. And we think that we are so clever. No, a fruit fly can also do it. So these are my wife and children. I am teacher. Renounce this unripe I. Keep the ripe I. What is the ripe I? The ripe I makes you feel that you are God's servant or his devotee, and that God is the doer and you are his instrument. It's as simple as that. We get rid of this unripe ego by assuming a kind of ego which puts oneself in the humble, subordinate role of a servant or a devotee, or even as a child, and that the one who is doing everything is doing it through this instrument. When we established this ashram, I was told by others, you are the Lord's instrument in doing this. It was no surprise to me because I always felt it. And I always felt that any inspiration, creative inspiration, came to me as a part of a voice or a message from the divine, even identifying a suitable place and then what to do with it, transforming something which was, in some people's view, almost impossible into something that is a wonderful thing today. But it is just a building, and should remind us that just as the building has a suitable shrine room, the mind itself is the shrine room. And the kitchen and so on and so forth, and all the other interior parts and living quarters and so on, this is the interior, physical interior, and the outside of the building is there. And these are all instrumental. They all have a function. Every center has a function. And every person, every individual, every body and mind that is, and there are millions and millions of them, they all have an individual function, and they all should fit in together nicely. What we call swadharma. They should all fit in with their particular skills and abilities, so that we have no necessity to compete. We are filling always the non-competitive gap. And if you want a way forward, always look for the non-competitive gap to fill. So then he goes on, I ask Keshav to give up this unripe I, the ego that feels I am the servant, to give up this unripe ego. The ego that feels I am the servant of God, I am the lover of God, doesn't injure anyone. And I said to him, you have been constantly talking of your organization and your following, but people also go away from your organization. And Keshav answers, yes, it's true, sir. After staying in it for several years, people go to another organization. What is worse, on deserting me, they abuse me right and left. Isn't this a common factor? What is worse, he says? On deserting me, they abuse me right and left. I can think of nothing. There's a personal assault. It's assault on me. I take it personally. That means I am kind of vacillating. I'm not a steady person. Somebody praises me, I get cosmic inflation, a big inflation. I feel good. I smile. My back straightens and I nod. Thank you so much. When somebody criticizes me or scandalizes against me, I shrink. Oh, poor me. What? And I start then thinking, how can people do this, and so on and so forth, and plotting strategies and all these kinds of things. People come and people go, and it is not my organization, and it is not my body, it is not my mind. Why don't you study their nature beforehand? I said. Is there any good in making anybody and everybody a disciple? And we have to have a level of discernment, which means humility is not stupidity. Humility is not being the doormat. Humility is being wise enough to admit one's faults and failings and seek feedback about it. Can you tell me, how am I doing? Help me in my assessment, and acknowledging it and making the correction. It is extremely difficult to go beyond the three gunas. What does this mean? It means that there are these three evolutionary forces that entrap us in assuming that this world is a reality, despite the fact that it's a moving scenario, and that this body and mind, which are aggregates of things, and at the end of the day are reduced to atomic waves, that this is a permanent thing, and that we will live forever and we will not. One cannot reach that state without having realized God. Man dwells in the realm of Maya. Maya does not permit him to see God. It has made him a victim of ignorance. And then he relates a story. Once Hriday brought a bull calf here. I saw one day that he had tied it with a rope in the garden so that it might graze there. And I asked him, why do you tie this calf there every day? Uncle, he said, I am going to send this calf to our village, and when it grows strong, I shall yoke it to the plough. As soon as I heard these words, I was stunned to think, how inscrutable is the play of the divine Maya. Kumarpuka and Shihor are so far away from Calcutta. This poor calf must go all that way. Then it will grow, and at length it will be yoked to the plough. This is indeed the world. This indeed is Maya. And I fell down unconscious. Only after a long time did I regain this consciousness. I began telling you, having read out from the Bhagavad Gita, these values that humility and modesty are there, and non-attachment, asaktir anabhir anirba, sorry, I will start again. Asaktir anabhi sangha putra dhara kridha isu nityam cha samachittatam ishtanisto papatisu. Non-attachment, asaktir, non-identification of oneself with what? With son, wife, home, and the like, and constant equanimity in both favorable and unfavorable circumstances. What is the answer? Exactly the same as Ramakrishna put it. Mayi cha and yoga yena bhaktir avyabhi charini, and swerving devotion to me through the yoga of non-separation. I always have to feel joined. My attention always has to feel joined to the divine through the simple formula of love of God. Increasing love of God displaces this unripe ego and fills it with the ripe ego that has its fruit. I began talking about the king Bharata and how he was an unusual king and how he went into to the forest. And there he became emotionally attached. Well, he found a doe, a deer, and the deer found it difficult to cross a river. It was under attack, and the sage or king, he rescued this and nurtured it and fed it and so on and so forth, looked after it like a mother. And so he thought he would take care of it until it could take care of itself. That sounds reasonable. But then what happened? He thought, I am the one who's caring for this. I am the one who's looking after this. This is my responsibility. In other words, he became emotionally attached to the baby doe, feeding it, playing with it, and in the process ignoring his meditation, which he went to the forest to do. And King Bharata was already at the end of his life. So one day, naturally, the deer grew up and decided to roam a little bit more, exercise its freedom. And he couldn't find the doe anywhere near the cottage. So he looked for it all day, he looked for it all night, he couldn't find it. And so he was overcome with intense emotional pain, a pang, a longing, where's my child? And he laments about the missing deer. And his whole body couldn't take the toll. And so what happened? Thinking of the doe, he came back to his next life. He died. What was he born as again? A doe. And so he had a life of a doe, but memory and past lives have this way of pushing forward. The baggage comes with you. So he realized that because of his attachment to the doe, because we learn these lessons, he was reborn in the womb of a doe. And because he had attained a higher spiritual realization, of course, in his past life, he remembered this mistake. And though he trapped in a doe's body, his actions were that of a yogi, making sure that he was in the vicinity of saints and sages and yogis. So he would sit in ashrams, he would sit with rishis, with sages, he would listen to them sing and chant hymns and so on. And as time passed, his life as a deer ended, and he then consciously took birth in a Brahmin woman's womb, and he was born as the second child of the second wife of a great scholar. And this scholar tried to educate him, but knowing his past attractions, that had led him astray from childhood, Bharata decided that he would act dumb. That's the meaning of the word Jada, that he was named from there on, Jada Bharata. That is somebody who is dull Bharata, a little dull, a little foolish. And so he would deliberately mispronounce mantras, though he knew them very well. And his father would teach him the rituals necessary, and he would do them in the reverse way. And his father, of course, loved him also very much, and it pained his heart that life would be difficult for his son after his death, because he would have no common sense. Anyway, his father died after some time, and his brothers and sister-in-law treated Jada Bharata, a kind of ancient version of Cinderella. And he would wander around, sometimes work for food, and sometimes he would beg for food. And the brothers worked him just like a slave and took advantage of him and mistreated him. And they sent him to stand in the fields, for example, watching the crops. And he would stand like a scarecrow from morning to evening. And sometimes they would feed him, sometimes he would just be standing there on an empty stomach. Now it became like this, that eventually he was noticed after some time by a gang of men, and they found him. They assigned him to carry their king's palanquin. It was the palanquin of King Rahugana, the kingdom of Sindhu and Sauvara. And without complaining, Jadu Bharat becomes a carrier of king's palanquin. Now, I'm going to pause there because we have to understand, in the context of humility, great strength of restraint. Knowing all this, having this superior knowledge, he remains quiet and is humble enough to take the abuse. I'm not recommending it for everybody, but I'm saying that this was the model of humility. But also it comes out as the model of wisdom, because when he does finally break his silence, it is all full of wisdom. Anyway, it so happened that as they were carrying the king, 4 people, you see, 1 on each corner, then Jadabharata stretched his step to avoid stepping on a small worm in the path. And of course, that meant that the palanquin became unbalanced, shook badly, and the king shouted at Jadabharat. It's like you have a puncture on the one side. And when he shook the palanquin for the second time in an attempt to save the life of a worm, the king lost all his patience and told him off. Second time. Why are you jolting me? Next time, he really got angry. And at this time, Jadabharat, for the first time, spoke. First time in his life. He speaks in a concise way. O king, how rude you are. I was avoiding stepping on another life at the cost of your discomfort. Where is your sense? He was shaming the king. How can you be so senseless, born in the king's family and brought up with the teachings of the scriptures? You don't deserve to be a king if you have no compassion for all of life. It will be a quality of a king. Leave your arrogance and fulfill your duties obediently. Focus on virtue. Now here's a contrast. We start off with somebody who is the epitome of humility, and then he speaks that humility gives him the strength of wisdom. Strength of wisdom, and then even in the humility and the compassion with it, the king is arrogant. So there's a contrast. No humility from the king until this dialogue comes to light. And so, leave your arrogance and fulfill all your duties. And the king understood he wasn't in the company then of an ordinary simpleton. So he asked, who are you? And Bharat replies, you see, in my past I was known as King Bharata. In fact, I'm your ancestor. And you are from the same lineage. I have no purpose in life except realization of the final truth. And I'm wandering around because I have no desire left anymore, no uses for anything material. So why don't you live a life of virtue and give up your pride? In other words, give up your I and mine. And so the king begged him to take him as a disciple. He took Jadabharata to the palace. He had him initiate all the other members of his palace into yoga, and Jadabharat stayed there until he taught some basics of spirituality and left the palace and so on. This is what the land of Bharata is named after. Then you see we have some teachings from Jesus, and you can find this in a passage in Luke's Gospel. When Jesus noticed that all who had come to the dinner were trying to sit in the seats of honor near the head of the table, he gave them this advice. When you are invited to a wedding feast, don't sit in the seat of honor. What if someone who is more distinguished than you has also been invited? Then you'll be embarrassed. They'll say, please, can you sit downwards? Then you'll be embarrassed. You'll take the lowest place, and then they can move you up. That makes a lot of common sense. And so you'll be embarrassed. You'll have to take whatever seat is left at the foot of the table. Instead, take the lowest place, he says, at the foot of the table. Then when your host sees you, he'll come and say, friend, we have a better place for you. Then you will be honored in front of all the guests. Now, you may think that this is just strategic. No, it's out of a genuine feeling that I am actually, maybe, as in Ramakrishna's language, lower than the lowest worm, actually. A kind of honesty which is not self-denigration, but which says, actually, I have no right to criticize others since I myself am not perfect. I have no right to change others since I myself require changing. I have no right to think of myself in any special way, as I know, and I'm going to use the words of Ramakrishna's consort, a few, she puts a figure on it, a few pounds of ash, that's all. That's as much as the body is. And if you think that you are a very special, elevated person, then understand that your sense of self is nothing more than a handful of ashes at the end of the day after cremation. That's all. So humility is something, a virtue which has to be engendered. And where does the strength come in? The strength comes in because, and here we come to Julian of Norwich, and she is saying, strength of humility. Do not blame yourself too much. This is the inspiration she had. So humility is not self-denigration. Don't confuse the two. But it's also being honest with yourself, because we are all struggling with imperfections. It's like sailing. You don't go directly to something, you do tacking. You go in a zigzag fashion, making sure that the wind is always pushing the sail. And to do that, you may have to zigzag, not go in a straight line. You won't go in a straight line. And so, don't blame yourself too much, thinking that your trouble and distress is all your fault. You are under the spell of ignorance or maya. In my words. For it's not my will, it's not the divine will, I should say, that you should be unduly sad and despondent. There are many positions in religion that think that life is a punishment. In Hinduism, we call it karma. Oh, it must be my karma. This happened to me. See my karma. This is only nothing but foolish superstition. Don't think about that. No point in analyzing that or blaming yourself for it. Nothing like that. Because there is no point. Life is not supposed to be full of undue sadness and despondency. Life is meant to expose and to reveal all the beautiful things which are there. And then you may say, in the midst of catastrophes, how is that possible? Well, that is certainly difficult, no doubt. But the fact is that even in the most difficult circumstances, there is always some goodness to see. Our enemy tries to depress us by false fears. Now, this was being written in the 14th century, maybe early 15th century. And what was the enemy there? The enemy can come in the form of thoughts, mainly thoughts and reactions. And they try to depress us by false fears. What is there to fear if you see the divine lower everywhere, in all eyes, in all faces, in all scenes, in the sky, in the environment, in the breath itself? Everywhere you look actually is an indicator. Look, here I am, here I am, here I am. Do you see me behind a mask? What is the mask? Well, the mask is the ego, no doubt. But the mask is the sun, the moon. The mask is everything that appears individually in space. His intention. So the divine intention, the divine purpose is to make us so weary and dejected that we let the blessed sight of everlasting friend slip from our minds. In other words, there is merit in the downside of things, the experience of that, because from there we see the contrast. We can raise the mind up. It is a beautiful humility. St. Julian of Norwich says, it's a beautiful humility brought about by the grace and mercy of the pure divine energy that is flowing. When a sinful soul willingly and gladly accepts the chastisement of the divine, my child, you did this, you did that. Oh, okay, thank you. Make the correction. Then it is the divine itself that gives us the inspiration and the courage and the grace to lift ourselves and go forward. It will seem light and easy then, everything. If only we will accept contentedly what the divine calls us not only to bear, but also to experience. This great strength in this quality of humility is there. The opposite, of course, will be to react on the basis of an assumption, I am so-and-so. We have to revise that. We have to stand when that happens and observe it. And we have to reframe it completely in many different ways. The easiest way will be to say, thou art the doer, I am nothing. Thou art the operator, I am the machine. Thou art everything. A prayer like that. The ego doesn't vanish easily, that's for sure. It does only with the dawning of self-knowledge, and the more that rises, the more the other one diminishes. That's the fact of it. So we have to cultivate the positivity that comes with faith and knowledge that this Lord of the universe that we intimately bring in as our dearest and nearest is our magnificent obsession. Live with it day in, day out, comes as time, make it the constant companion, practice walking with that, practice attuning the mind to that, practice breathing that, practice exhaling with that, practice the understanding of the heartbeat, being in tune with it, see it with the eyes everywhere, hear it with the ears everywhere. Every sound belongs to Him, every sight belongs to Him. Registering everything to divine, learning the habit of doing that. The ego that makes a person feel they are a devotee of God, just to summarize, or a son or a servant of God, that is a good, that is the right ego which is being cultivated. So, humility is a laudable virtue. It's integral to our knowledge. Humility is primarily a relational virtue because it is always in the setting of a relationship with somebody. This becomes the context for our practice. And so Jesus teaches this humility. Imagine now that you are with a group of people, and there are two instances of it that I can think of, and you are about to exit this world. And what do? Your band of friends and disciples, even, you come down as a teacher and you wash their feet, amidst protests, no doubt. Look at the contrast. We have become used in Oriental culture, we have become used to being honored as monks. People prostrate to us, give us a namaskar, touch our feet, put garlands around our neck, and all of these things. And if our ego is unripe, then the ego will puff out and become bloated. I am special. Look how they honor me. And look at the other side. When somebody gives me a casual glance and walks on, the ego gets wounded. What kind of thing is that? So Jesus came to Jerusalem on a donkey. He didn't come in a Tesla car or something. He came in humility, deliberately coming in humility. And look at the humiliation of his arrest and all the rest of it. And then in more recent times, there was Vivekananda washing Nivedita's hands and supplying her with food and so on. And she said, but I should be doing it for you. You are my guru. And he said, no, Jesus washed the feet of his disciples. And she almost blurted out, but that was the last time. That's the story. That's Nivedita and Vivekananda. The natural humility that comes from a saintly person is a lesson to us all, that if such a great person can be humble, then and be of service, because the humility comes out as an act of service, and be an act of service, then of course this is an example I'll follow, not only in terms of an exemplary pattern of behavior, but also, and as a model, but also as a methodology that we can employ. All right. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thanks.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
All right.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Okay.
Thank you, Swami.
Good.